you walk through the door, you're a freshman. Don't just give it a shot, right? Like just don't be afraid to fail. Let's go with that one.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to fail. It's going to happen, but each time you go through it, it becomes easier, and you get past it, and you build that confidence that you can go and give it a shot. So that's what I would say.
Hello everyone, my name is Jimmy Smith and welcome to episode number 33 of the Rambler podcast, where we are passionate about sharing what makes Cathedral Prep the standard of excellence. On this episode of the podcast, we are very excited to have John Cordier here with me as a guest on the podcast. John's a 2010 graduate of Cathedral Prep, and he is the co-founder and CEO of Epistemics. So during his time at Prep, John was the class president, captain of the soccer team, and an active member of the rally crew. I graduated just a year behind John, so I got to see all this stuff firsthand, and they had the best rallies and so much fun creating that experience for me at Prep personally. But after graduating from Prep, he attended the University of Pittsburgh, and he went on to go study neuroscience and sociology. Based on his upbringing and love for math and science with influences from Prep teachers such as Mrs. Mullen, Mrs. Stosh, and Mr. Clancy, he was bound to get into complex social systems and computational science at some point in his career. So after working with Don Burke at the University of Pittsburgh Public Health Dynamics Lab, he led the efforts to create the startup company Epistemics. Epistemics is a software company that uses synthetic populations to simulate how behaviors, ideas, products, and information spread in populations. So one way that John's described how you can think of what they do is a combination of SimCity and Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, and The Matrix, which I thought was pretty cool when reading that. John is also a co-founder of Common Good AI, alongside leaders in AI from MIT, Harvard, CMU, and Berkeley. Town Hall AI, which is a spin-off of Common Good AI, helps local organizations use collective intelligence to create solutions to local challenges. And the Beautiful Game Galleries, which aims to fund climate migration research through photojournalism, galleries showcasing images of people playing soccer from around the world leading up to the 2026 World Cup. And prior to Epistemics and his current projects, John founded a nonprofit organization that got high school students in the community based participatory research to solve local challenges in their own community. As a champion for using geospatial and simulation software to improve strategy, forecasting, and decision-making, John spends his non-professional work time on data science education initiatives. If he wasn't busy enough already with everything, it sounds like he got going on, which is good stuff.
Yeah.
From his days at Prep, he still uses the framework of spirit, mind, and body to live an intentional life of harmony across his personal and professional endeavors. He currently lives in Salt Lake City, Utah, and for fun spends times hiking, skiing, road biking, and hanging out with the newest member of his family, Rue, a 5-month-old golden retriever.
That's right.
Love it. So, yeah, John, we're thrilled to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on.
I'm glad that I got the invitation. Thanks.
Yeah. It was great. It was about a month or so ago. So I got to say, I've had your name on my podcast list for quite some time.
Okay.
And I ran into your mom. We were talking about this, but about a month ago or so, and she's like, "Oh, John's actually going to be coming to Erie." I was like, "Oh, I got to get a hold of him. Trying to set this up."
Yeah, glad we were able to make it happen. Yeah.
And I think it was pretty cool. So before we hopped on here, walking you around Prep, being able to show you the new building.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing the whole front of the building and all of the new spaces that enable both teachers and students to collaborate with one another, it's really impressive. And I think just how intentional each space was designed, it shows. And yeah, really proud as an alum to see it. It's really impressive.
Yeah, it's very exciting. We had a great first year of this new co-ed Cathedral Prep, the building under construction. So now we're excited to continue to grow on the momentum we have. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're thrilled and happy you're able to make it back. And I know when we were walking in, you got to see Chet Moffitt.
I did, yep.
He remembered you right away, too. He recognized your voice.
Recognized the voice, and he's like, is that Cordier? And I was like, yep, that's me. Yeah, I had good times on cross country and track with him. And yeah, it's lovely to be back. I also think it's really cool, like the room that we're in right now, just being able to see the new space integrated in with the former exterior of the building. Like sticking to some of the tradition-oriented things it's really nice to see. But like I'm blown away. Like the computer labs, the engineering labs, like these are all things that were not even close to being in existence when we were in school.
Right.
And it's great to see. Like, I'm now in a software and like high performance computing type company, and my entry point into that was college, and now students here are getting exposed when they're 14, 15 years old, which is incredible.
Yeah. It's pretty neat to see all the spaces, and it makes me proud as well as an alum. And we're even joking. I mean, you graduated in 2010. I was 2011. It doesn't feel like that long ago, but you look at all the changes in here, it makes it feel like forever ago because all the new stuff that's here.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess we can start off by, why don't you tell me a little about your time at Prep, right? So maybe, why you even decided, let's start here, why you decided even attending Cathedral Prep.
Yeah, so prior to Prep, I went to Walnut Creek Middle School, so would have been on a track to go to McDowell.
Right.
And I grew up playing soccer, and so had some coaches that were connected not only to Prep, but also Mercyhurst and McDowell. So there was that as a component. There was the academic component, and as we were talking earlier, like the way that I moved to Salt Lake City was kind of like a analytical approach. It was like, what time zone do I work best in? What sort of population size does the city have? What's the distance between the airport and a ski lift?
Right.
When I was in high school, I tried to see if my mom could pull out this spreadsheet that I came up with, but I had 20 different criteria, and I ranked like 1, 2, or 3 across Prep, McDowell, and Mercyhurst, and I did that as like a intentional way of going about that decision, and Prep won out both on paper and with what my gut was telling me, and so that was a good gut check.
That's really cool.
Yeah, the other funny part about that was so Joanne Mullen, she lived diagonally from me, like right across the street, and so I had her influence, and then my next door neighbor was actually the wide receiver coach for McDowell, and so he was trying to pressure me on like well, stop playing soccer, just come play football at McDowell.
Yeah.
And Joanne was very much so checking my math homework and making sure I was using my brain rather than brawn to make this decision. So I guess that's the theme of it. I went with choosing the more brainy side, and that's what brought me to Prep.
Yeah. That's really funny. Just being able to have the criteria of what you were looking for. Now, did you have any social influences, like friends who were going one way or another that you had also?
So for that decision, if I go back to what was in my 14-year-old brain, I think I was a bit nervous going to Prep.
Yeah.
I was a little uncertain on the public school to private school dynamic.
Right.
I wasn't like, we went to OLP for like mass and everything, but it wasn't overly involved in anything like theology oriented.
Right.
So that was a question mark that I had, but no, socially I was down for it, and I think a common thread throughout like earlier life, high school life, college, and afterwards is like finding ways that I'm pushed and challenged. So I looked at it as a new challenge, and like one of the other things socially that came about was at the time, I don't know what the scheduling system is right now, but McDowell had the block schedule, Mercyhurst had the block schedule, Prep we would do 8 classes in a day.
And they still do.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. So
it's like 9 now, but yes, it's the same idea.
So my just being self-aware enough about my learning style, the 8 a day and like in out like very quick was helpful for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are all social dynamics within the context of even a class schedule and how that plays out at school.
Yeah. And so then when now you decide, you made that decision, you're coming to Prep, you're here. We listed off all the things that you were involved in. I mean, you pretty much you accepted the culture very quickly, it looks like, and you became very successful in your time at Prep. Can you talk to us about what are some of your best memories from your time as a student and things that you hold on to?
Yeah, I was really excited to answer this question when you shot it over, and even back to the intro. So I still use spirit, mind, and body as something that I measure myself on all the time. I do a quarterly exercise that is spirit, mind, body, and I do this across like what happens in a year, what happens each month, what happens each week that checks those boxes.
Yeah.
So going back to my time at prep, the spirit part is definitely the first rally that my friends and I tried to put on. And the dynamics around that, so we were juniors when we did our first one.
Okay.
So there was like the lull in the like football, basketball time, and it's just like, I don't know, like December, January, it's just dark all the time. And so I think the seniors got into a little bit of a slump, and we were ambitious enough to say, hey, like, we're going to do this next rally.
Right.
Like the new guard is in. And I remember, like, as part of that, Russell Skripczak had the like the orange Wendy wig, and he was the person that was doing the roller coaster thing then, and then he let me do that.
Yep. And
part of it was like a ceremonious Russell passing that wig on to me.
Oh, that's cool.
So that, from the spirit side, very, very memorable.
And that was a good basketball season too, where they made a good run. And I remember going to these games, traveling all over.
Yeah. Some of those were pretty wild. We played in Sharon a couple times, I think.
Yep.
And that was great. So that was the spirit. On the mind side, we had a good group of the Gannon scholars where we'd get together in the library, which now is the teacher's library, which is very cool.
Yeah.
But we turned like our study sessions into potluck lunches, and we'd be like talking like, oh, like, how do we do this like math problem in Mullen's class that we all have, just after this? Oh, like, how, what argument did you use to write this paper for whatever Gannon class we were in together at the time? But then once the Gannon classes ended, we just kept showing up even though we didn't have to, and we would, like okay, like, who's doing like what course of the potluck? So that was a lot of fun.
That's
and
cool.
Then the body side of it, I'll probably never forget how nervous I was playing in my first Prep McDowell soccer match. It was at McDowell. I was a freshman. It's like the second week of school, and yeah, the butterflies there were worse than like first soccer match in college or anything else. Yeah.
But it shows the level of importance you put on that match and that rivalry between us and and them to be able to do that. And I can relate though too. I played baseball, and so it's just it's different when you go and play them. It's different. And
totally, yeah. First time you're probably stepping in the batter's box. It's like, okay, like, here we go.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I remember like showing up to these games as a little kid, and it's a very communal type experience, and also one of the great things about coming back to Erie, like it's a very present thing.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's pretty cool. You mentioned when I was reading out the bio, some of the key teachers that were here that really helped guide you and influence you to where you are today. And it's pretty neat to see, these years when you're between 14 and 18 years old, how now you look at the career you have and what you've done and how important that role was for those teachers during those years.
Yeah, absolutely. So Joanne Mullen drove me to school my freshman and sophomore year because she lived right across the street from me, and my mom worked in the Girard School District, so she was going the opposite direction. And so, school with her every day, and then I had her for like the advanced math classes, and so there was no BSing in the car if homework wasn't done. Like, she would know. But that extended beyond the time in high school. So she was somebody had a huge influence on my life, and I'd get back from, like, I went to Pitt for college.
Yeah.
I'd get back from Pitt for whatever break it was, and I would go over to Mrs. Mullen's house for probably like 3 to 4 hours to talk about courses and school and all the academic stuff. Pretty much the same conversations that I was having with her when I was like in this like prep Bruce McDowell like decision point.
Yeah.
She's like, like I don't care like how your soccer like stuff played out at Pitt this year, like, and we were always at the bottom of the Big East, so that there weren't many highlights to share there. But she was always interested in like these different neuroscience classes and everything. We'd go into that, and then what other things we were doing in more like the extracurricular academic oriented stuff. So when I got into undergraduate research with a neuroscience lab. She was always really interested in that, and then trying to connect that to like math principles and everything. And I generally look forward to that when I was coming home. I'd hang out with her, probably hanging out with my mom and sister for a few hours. So yeah, big impact on me.
Yeah, very cool, and it's awesome how amazing she was as an educator and a legend, here at Prep, and her influence with Villa as well. So, you had those formative years where you had, teachers and educators who really influenced you, and then now to see what you're doing is so cool. I love being able to, catch up with you and hear all the things you've been doing, and having a chance to talk with you a little bit as we're going through the tour. Can you walk us through what it took for you to take those passions and interests for the math and sciences and, just taking the concept stage of a company, what it took for you to do that, and then as you kind of get through that, what it took for you to have the vision to actually execute that and turn it into a company. If you wouldn't mind kind of walking us through what that was for you.
Yeah, it's a long journey to make that happen. So you might liken it to something that happens every year in sports, like whatever team makes the Super Bowl or whoever is making the NBA Finals. You can look at them and say, oh, well, like they're just making it click and it just happens. Well, there's years prior to that. And when you're in sort of the norming, storming mode of like building a team, like there's lots of dynamics and lots of background that come with that. So my journey probably started when I was 3 years old or so. So my parents were in the military, so we'd move every so often. And that backdrop of travel, I think, had a big influence on me. And so wherever my dad was living, he never lived on a military base. He always lived in whatever community, or like wherever he was stationed, across the U.S. and in Europe. And so from a young age, I had the experience to see different social dynamics play out here in the United States, which you see all the time in the news. Right. And then in Europe as a 10, 11, 12 or so, and then being able to travel to other countries. So that as a backdrop, I kind of always was drawn to travel, but also places and spaces and what made them different from one another. Yeah. And so with a backdrop on like a geospatial style of thinking, walking through like the computer lab, like we never had like computer geospatial modeling type stuff in our classes. Yeah. The closest thing we had was the course at Prep I took my freshman year, AP Human Geography. And that course was like, that is kind of how I see the world. Yeah. And it wasn't until getting into college that I was able to kind of connect some of those things. So there was there's a course or a series of courses that led to a certificate in the history and philosophy of medicine. And at the time I was just doing the neuroscience degree, and then was into this one course on the philosophy of medicine and the sociology of medicine. And the sociology of like how cities are put together and social determinants lead to health outcomes, that's something that was part of my lived experience. And so when I was back in graduate school, I was given the opportunity to work with somebody who had been like world leading in that space for the better part of a decade and a half. And so, at the time I was between going to medical school or doing a PhD in neuroscience to see like what sort of impact I wanted to have. But this opportunity to work with the Public Health Dynamics Lab combined both the geospatial side of things, the decision science, and when I was looking at the PhD program in cognitive neuroscience, it was about education policy. It's like the idea that you could craft education and curriculum programs that map to how different individuals learn best. Right. And so I was able to kind of look at the influence of doing policy stuff, the data science work, and keeping it related to health. That all kind of came together in a perfect storm. So it's a long way to say like, I'm not going to take a job when I graduate. Yeah. I'm going to go out and raise some money and eat ramen and still live like a college student for as many years as it takes before you really start getting traction. So yeah, it's a long journey.
Long journey, but very impressive to see how you were able to take your social upbringing, keep that interest level for so many years about what it was. Like you even mentioned your freshman year, having that class that really started to open your eyes to what it was that you really enjoyed, and then now at the university level, being able to study the things that you did that really brought everything together for you. Then have the opportunity, like you said, to work with somebody on something that was able to grow. It's really interesting to see how like all those things really shaped who you are as you were growing up, and then you continue to have opportunities of the doors opening to dive even deeper into it.
And it's the same like for some of those characters in graduate school for me that were very similar to the Stosh, Clancy, Mullen. So like this guy, Don Burke, he was dean of the School of Public Health. He led all of infectious disease research for the U.S. military for 23 years, then led it at Hopkins, then became the dean of the School of Public Health at Pitt. He could have chosen just about anybody to take on this challenge, and he gave me the opportunity. He's just another guy that grew up liking math and science and played sports. He grew up in Cleveland. So like, he's a golden retriever guy.
There you go.
Rue, my new golden retriever. So yeah, he's somebody that took a bet on me, and that's stuff that I don't take lightly. So there's also like the mentors along the way really matter, and like connecting that to what kind of sets the vision. Like the second half of that question is, would you find somebody that kind of has a similar worldview to you, and they have had a successful career path? That's something that opens the door for you to see yourself be able to do something similar. And so, even through early mid-20s, uncertain of like, all right, what is the career path that I want to jump into? And another, I think what led me even to the School of Public Health is I sort of set a challenge for myself of reading a book a week for a year. And my logic here was, if I can't read a book a week in a certain subject for a whole year, why would I commit 4 years of my life to it, or 4 to 8 years for a like advanced degree, and then an entire career? And so I didn't get to 52 books. I got to like 40, but
nice.
They were all around like the innovation and social determinants of health and public health, and it's like, okay, this is what I really care about. So, and Don had a similar vision of how you can combine advances in computing and mathematics and computer science and bridge that into other fields. And the vision for our company all along has been, if we get this software adopted by more people and train other people on how to use this software, it's less about the software and even more about the thinking that it enables you to do. And that's the cool thing about systems thinking and trying to answer these complex questions. So like our initial use case was how to mitigate the spread of infectious diseases. And the dynamics around this are behavioral. It's like people focus on like, oh, it's the disease, and we don't have the data on the disease. Well, when people change their behavior, that has a bigger impact on driving epidemics forward. And that could be disease epidemics, it could be information epidemics, product adoption. So in the bio, I mentioned Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. So Malcolm Gladwell interviewed Don, my co-founder.
Oh, no way.
To write The Tipping Point back in 2000. So it's like these same principles, they play out in all areas of our life. So that, it's really fun.
And that is a good book. If anybody hasn't read that yet, I would recommend it as well. It's a great read. I read that a number of years ago, but it was very impactful for the studies that he does. And all his books are really excellent caseworks and studies.
Absolutely. And he's an excellent storyteller. And I think that's the power when you have like the type of information somebody like that has, and even like that my co-founder had. Gladwell being able to like pull it out in a way that is explainable to. I think it's a great, like, if you're at Prep Villa this year, like Tipping Point, great book, read it. But yeah, his ability to tell stories succinctly and communicate complex ideas, it's great.
So, a lot of really good stuff there. I guess, one of the things that as I was reflecting on who you are and what, you've been able to accomplish so far in your career is, what is it that drives you? What is it that keeps you going forward with your career and the things that you've been able to do up to this point?
It comes back to purpose. So, like, starting a company is challenging in the early days, especially. Everything on your financial statements tell you should quit and this is not going to work, and you have to get comfortable hearing no a lot from investors, customers, people that you're trying to hire. So there's this thing that you have to draw on that is purpose oriented, and you can look at different types of motivation, and this is something that I've had to study over like a longer period of time. So even like when I was captain of the soccer team back at prep, like you have different teammates that are motivated by different things, and you probably saw this in baseball as well.
Yep.
Then you probably even see that with family members. So like motivation, whether it's extrinsic or intrinsic, very important. But what keeps driving me forward is going back to the purpose of why we started the company, which ultimately, if we're successful, then that leads to more people having higher qualities of life and better health outcomes for entire populations of people. Yeah. So that's the foundation. When there's an HR issue and there's a payroll issue and this customer's like maybe an expectation wasn't managed well, it's like those challenging things that like could boil up. Coming back to purpose and waking up, and it's like, yeah, like these are all things that are going to happen. But you have to find a way to segment those things out in your mind, and it comes back to purpose, because yeah, starting a company, it's challenging, and
yeah,
early, I mean, there's plenty of days that I've like, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can, I don't know if I should raise money from this group of people or this fund, because there's so much risk.
Right.
But then as you push through that and de-risk things, it's like, oh, I wouldn't be doing anything else. This is so obvious. And then you get the momentum and customers start seeing value. You start building a good culture, and the business becomes real, and becomes a well-oiled machine. And it's a process.
Yeah. When I think like anything, whether you're listening to this podcast and you're a student at prep now, or you're in college, or you're in your career, life can be very cyclical, where you go through these moments of highs and you're very excited about what it is that you're doing, and then you have those moments where you start to doubt, right? Like you just kind of mentioned, you're sitting there wondering, can I even get through what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And it's like, you just have to have the confidence in yourself and the respect to say, I'm going to keep pushing forward and keep giving it my all to see it through.
Yeah. I mean, when you come back to motivation, there's 3 principles of motivation. One is activation. So like, how are you going to just start to do the thing?
Yeah.
And that could be, it's not like starting a company wasn't the first time that I was motivated enough to activate something.
Right.
Right. When I was at prep, I, in the soccer dynamics. So in 2008, the U.S. Soccer Academy system started, and there was not an academy in Erie. And so it was like, well, I'm going to go and seek one out. Yeah. And so I was driving to Buffalo and Rochester 2 or 3 hours multiple times a week just to go play on an academy team.
Yeah.
And there's different parts of activation that you do that. It might work out, it might not, but you have to be able to learn from failure, because starting a company, you're failing all the time. And like, so activation, one part of motivation. The other one is persistence. And this is where like sports teach great lessons, music teaches great lessons. You just have to show up and practice. And I and maybe we'll get into this like later on, but I view some of my mentors, they're more about persistence and consistency than talent, because talent can flame out, and once you've had the activation and then you're persistent about something, you're going to fail. And it's like, are you resilient enough to show up the next day,
right,
and get after it? And then the third part, so we have activation, persistence, and the other one is intensity. And you can't be 120% all the time. There's certain times where you stretch yourself, but then you have to like kind of come back and
group.
Yeah, definitely
recharge.
Yeah, and so there's like that recharge part, but then like if you do have the motivation, and like I think I can be intense about things longer than the average.
Sure.
And Sam Altman, he's the founder of OpenAI, he said like the best CEOs, so these are CEOs that are 4 standard deviations away from like the norm, the biggest difference between them and other CEOs who are already like hyper competitive people for the most part is that their level of determination is higher. And so like when things aren't going on like great, they're able to like drive through it and have like a higher level of resilience.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the trenches, it's tough. And you could say the same thing for people that take that talent and pursue it in sports. Same thing, taking that talent, pursuing it in music or computer science or whatever it is.
Right. And I've heard at one point or another talking about that is it's like a muscle, right? So you might not be a level 10, intensity determined person, but have the self-awareness to see where you're at, and then can you push yourself a little bit to grow that part of yourself?
Yeah.
Right?
Totally. And it doesn't like the intensity to a 10, that's where burnout comes in. I know that's a series of questions like I saw you were going to pose, and it's a great topic area, but across the activation and those things don't happen unless you have a purpose or reason why you're doing it.
Right.
And then when you look at yourself, and like if you're an intrinsically motivated person, there's 3 dynamics to that. And these 3 things came from, what's the book called? I think Daniel Pink wrote it, and it's Drive.
Yes.
Drive by Daniel Pink. And he talks about, for intrinsically motivated people, there's the balance of mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And so mastery is like, can you go and get good at something, which is, it's a challenge, and like going through that, and like once you like figure something out or have that aha moment, it's like, like I'm more motivated now.
Right.
And then autonomy is like you want to have some of that self-discovery, not just like directed, like this is exactly what to do. So intrinsically motivated people like to have that, and then ultimately, it comes back to purpose and something that can drive you through all the mess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things I wanted to reflect with you on too, and I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to rephrase it for how I originally sent it to you, because at first I put, how methodical are you about your daily actions, and what roles do you believe that played in your success? And just listening to you, we don't need to ask how methodical are you, because we can tell just listening you are a very methodical person. So I'd rather rephrase it and say, more so, what advice would you give for people on becoming more methodical? Because you're already very methodical. I can tell your decision making from coming to prep, what you do now, you have a process and a purpose behind it. So I guess, what advice would you have for us, everyday people who maybe don't have those systems in place or a methodology to your day to create the success routines, and maybe share what that's done for you in your career to be successful?
Yeah.
So
one of the ways that I'd look at this, somebody else on the podcast, he also does Ironman, so I don't know if he brought this up, referencing Judge Drusilla.
Yep.
So one day I woke up and I said, you know what, I'm gonna commit to doing an Ironman.
Yeah.
It's always something I wanted to do. And you can read all these different training guides and all this stuff, and like they give you like very prescriptive things. Well, my situation is like early days of starting a company, and I couldn't have that. But I knew, getting back to like consistency beats talent. I said I need to find a way to consistently build good habits that will enable me to compete and finish this thing. So I looked at like what are some basics day to day. So it was like, did I go to bed on time? Did I wake up around the same time? Did I manage alcohol consumption? Did I eat healthy? And did I read? And it was like, I took a big whiteboard and I listed those, I think it was 5 or 6 things at the top. And I had Monday through Sunday. And I said, okay, I'm going to score myself on this to see, like, I know that I'm self-aware enough to know that when I do these things every day, I'm better. I'm a better version of myself. So whatever that is for somebody, for me, I didn't read all that much when I was in my prep days. I regret not reading as much, to be clear. Once I stopped playing sports, that became a big part of the mental headspace that I had from not being like so tied up in like what happened at the last practice or last game.
Right.
I was able to fill my mind with a little bit more intellectual curiosity and thoughts. So reading became a big part of my life. And I knew that if I read and worked out every day by 8 a.m., everything else was a bonus. So I scored myself on that. And then when I started saying, okay, I'm 4 months out from this Ironman date, I wrote down, here are the different workouts that I'd like to accomplish in a week. And so it was like a long run, a long bike, a fast run, fast bike yoga, a weightlifting, and swimming. And I knew like each of my days were totally different from like starting a company and raising money, doing all the other stuff. So it was like, okay, I need to be kind to myself, knowing that I'm not going to get to all of these in a week. And I know that.
Yeah.
But the advice here is be kind to yourself. So what I ended up doing is I scored myself on, okay, here's my time that I blocked out to like work out. Which one of these do I want to do? How does my body feel? And sometimes it was like, you know what, I missed 2 weeks of not being able to do a really long bike ride. And it's like, hey, it's okay.
Right.
Did all this other stuff. So how I structured that, though, is that whiteboard was on the back of my bedroom door. And so before I would go out every morning, I would see it.
Right.
And then at the end of every day, I would see it. So this kind of got me in the habit of saying, okay, if I want to build a habit, it has to be present. I have to see it. I have to have a metric, and I have to fairly score myself.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think, in high school, college, young adult, and even like through the end of life, like building a habit, finding something that you care about. If you can put some light structure around it to start, you kind of get to prove to yourself, like, how much do I actually care about this, or do I actually care about something else?
Right.
And that's something I've learned along the way.
Well, and what I love about that too is, it comes to keys to success, things that really create, the life that we want to have for ourselves. You're not talking about anything grand or crazy. These are small things that we can all do. We can all implement in some way, setting that vision in front of us of just creating those daily routines. And like you said, being graceful to yourself, being kind to yourself, not making it, you look at the end of the week, you feel bad, now you get down and you get into a rut. No, it's like, let's build these successful habits, be self-aware enough to know, are you more of a morning person or are you a night owl? Some people thrive better at night. Some people thrive better in the morning. I can tell you I'm a morning person. My wife is not. She's better in the evening. I'm usually by the end of the night.
I'm in the same situation.
I start getting drowsy and my brain's not working as much. But you get me at 4 or 5 in the morning, I'm ready to go. So I just want to point that out. Like, I love what you're talking about here because it's stuff that we can all apply and do. It's nothing crazy or difficult.
Yeah. And I think I started doing this in part because of prep. Like not just because I'm on the podcast and saying this, but the spirit, mind, body notion. Like sometimes we'd even joke like, oh, it's a spirit, mind, body day. Like, haha, we're just gonna mess around for the afternoon. So like I actually do the spirit, mind, body assessment, and when you look at what helps your spirit, and that doesn't have to be just religion, doesn't have to be spirituality. It's sort of what are the things that for your personality, for the things you like bring you joy and happiness. So like my example of what I was scoring myself on a daily basis was like, I know that when I read, like, helps me out from the spirit thing. I know that I really enjoy hosting dinners. So like, it's like, okay, I should probably host a dinner like at least every other month with a big group of people. I really enjoy that. The mind side, it's like there's like I have to carve out time in my week for me to do like deep thinking. And that's something you probably hear in a lot of like self-help book genre type things that interview CEOs and founders and that thing. It's like you need the deep thinking time. And then on the body side, it's usually the more active I am, the clearer I'm able to think, and just making sure that whether it's a hike, going out fly fishing, something like it, and an activity can touch multiple things across spirit, mind, and body. And so I actually did this exercise with my partner where she and I looked at, okay, like what are the things that we do together for spirit and mind and body, and what are the things that I like to do that you don't like to do, but like I'm going to do these things because it hits like in one of those 3 buckets. And like that was a really helpful exercise that I went through with her. And it brought us closer and able to have good conversations about it. So when she's like, hey, I'm going skiing, and she skied like over 70 days this year. We also live in Salt Lake City, so it's easy. But it's like great. I think if I skied on that much, like I might just get bored of it. But like for her, it is like it's like her spirit and her
Right.
it calms her mind, which is important. So
Right. Absolutely. And it's cool that you're reflecting back to saying, about how prep really helped you create those parameters around how you guide your life. And
Yeah.
I remember Father Jabo always saying it's not a 4-year decision, it's a 40-year decision, right? And having to do with you're choosing prep not just for these 4 years, but for the rest of your life because of the impact that you're going to receive while being a student here. Now being, 10, 15 years out from being there, you can start to see why that statement is so true. And, so we've talked about a lot of different things here so far. And, when it comes to having certain skills or qualities that, for you and the success you've created, what do you think have been some of the most crucial for you in creating and growing the company to what you've done so far?
Yeah. I think baseline motivation and determination, that's one. So high there. And then second is being unafraid to fail, because you're going to fail every day at, a couple of things when you're starting out. And, part of the role, you have to be comfortable asking for help. And that's a really challenging thing for a lot of people to do. And whether that's personal life, business life, academics, asking for help, big challenge. So that's a maturity thing that once you get over that hurdle, it becomes much easier. And then most people, when you seek out their advice, they're glad to give it.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think is an important one. And that stems back to a book that my mom got me when I was 8 years old called I Can't Accept Not Trying, written by Michael Jordan.
Oh, wow.
It's like a 50-page, like there's maybe like 60 words per page.
Yeah.
But it walks through, this sort of mentality around like, I can't accept not trying, and you're going to try, you're going to fail, and building the resilience and the confidence so that when it happens, you miss a shot. Okay. You're going to take the next one like, oh, I'm definitely going to make it. And you keep telling yourself that, and eventually it starts happening.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I'd say the determination, the inability to fail, curiosity. So, like in undergrad, like I did one degree about what goes on in your brain, another one that happens like with all people. And so like somewhere in the middle was public health.
Yeah.
So there's this like high curiosity, I think is important. And the curiosity stems into being interested about what other people do.
Yeah.
And what makes other people tick. So
Right.
that's an important one. Empathy is another. Grit, connected to determination. Accountability is another one, and then resourceful. And those are actually the values that we list out at Epistemics. And
Very
so
cool.
like connecting each of those principles with a set of actions and behaviors, not just at work, but in other areas too. And I think, again, it goes back to like the spirit, mind, body notion of living an intentional life, and whether you take a really analytical, methodical approach to decisions, like I do sometimes. Other people, like, there's no way he's just making frantic CEO decisions, but for the most part, it's actually been thought out for a while. But,
yeah. Well, one of the things that you hit on there, so Kayla McBride, Villa class of 2010.
Yep.
She was on the podcast last year as a guest, and actually she's being inducted into the Hall of Fame, first ever Villa Hall of Fame.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just announced that recently, so a couple weeks after this episode of the podcast comes out, we're going to have our Hall of Fame ceremony, and Kayla's being inducted, which is really cool.
That is really cool.
Along with the 2009 Victor team and many others. But when
Okay.
she was on the podcast, she talked about how important it was to not have a fear of failure either.
Yeah.
That was one of the biggest things she hit on that she really shared with us on that episode, was talking about how important it was for her to learn that lesson as she went through Notre Dame playing basketball, and now what's it turned into for her career in the WNBA. So I think that's pretty cool that you guys shared similar type of things there, and having done so. Sticking on that idea of not being afraid to fail, would you mind sharing with us any failures or disappointments that you've experienced personally in your career, and what lessons you learned from failure that allowed you to, be a part of that?
Yeah. So one yeah, I mean, geez, I fail all the time, but
Ask my wife, I do too.
yeah. The one that I'll use that ties it back to epistemics and the business, and this would be true. This could happen to anyone who goes to start a business in my industry or any other. So we went out to raise a round of funding. We had half of it already in and committed, and then my role is like bringing in the other half alongside of the other funding partner. So this is the beginning of 2022, so right before the economy sort of like really starts taking a hit.
Yeah.
I bring two other parties to the table to like fund to get the whole round completed. I've already hired in anticipation that happens, and in the diligence process with the group that led the round, they didn't share as much with the other two parties. Next thing you know, they back out, and here I am with a team that we were going to be able to support with all of that funding coming in, and it didn't. So then here I am in the position where, we're very focused on building culture from the get-go. We're trying to build a culture. The next thing you know, it's like, oh, we just staffed up to 20 odd people. Now we're gonna have to cut back down to like 14, 13 people.
Right.
So those are tough decisions.
Yeah.
And you'd say like part of that's outside of my control, part of it's within my control. But I think the thing of that experience, what it comes back to is like, I still feel bad about letting somebody go that I've hired.
Yeah.
And sometimes that comes back and bites me in the butt because it's actually somebody that I should have let go because like not working with like the team culture earlier on. And other times I'm able to make that decision more quickly. So I'd say like from a failure dynamic side of things, there's, I think having that round fall apart in some ways and then rebuilding it through other investors over the course of the following 16 or so months.
Yeah.
That got us back into like a really solid position with good runway and, adding over 200 customers within a year. So it's like, okay, having not learned that lesson of hiring, we got a little bit too top heavy.
Right.
It's my first company, first go around. So I was a bit, I'd say I was probably a bit insecure about like, oh, well, I don't have a chief product officer. Maybe I should have a chief product officer. Like, well, so-and-so has one. Like, this is what that person's doing.
Yeah. And
hired like a great executive team, but like a lot of cooks in the kitchen without like a lot of individual contributors. So there's a series of lessons within that.
Yeah.
But I think to Kayla McBride's point, on like getting through failure, part of it's failure, part of it's regret. And on the theme of Daniel Pink, he has another book called The Power of Regret, and he talks about four. This could be another like good one to read for anybody listening to the podcast. So the four, and I might get these out of order, but there's the I wish I would have just reached out. So there's this like regret of not forming more connection.
Yeah.
There's the foundational regret, which is I wish I just would have put in the work. So maybe that's like, oh, I'm starting a company, but I'm real into this Netflix series, so like I'm gonna like go watch this tonight. That's just like something that you just shed yourself from. You just don't. Then there's the moral regret, like I wish I would have just done the right thing, and then I wish I would have just taken the risk or taken the chance. So like I think within each of those, like some people might conflate regret and failure, but they're in a league somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I've referenced this on the podcast before, but the Steve Jobs quote about, you can't connect the dots looking forward, but looking back you can. And it's like you're going through failure and tough times. We've all been there, and it's very difficult, but you try to pick up those pieces and keep moving forward. Years later, you can look back and say, well, if it wasn't for that happening, then X, Y, and Z wouldn't have happened. And, it's those experiences that really create your story, too. I don't think anybody likes the stories where like, oh, I just flow my way to success and there was no issues, no problems. That doesn't exist.
The hero's journey is not linear and up to the right and right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a mentor. He's done like 14 companies. This is one of the people that I'm going to connect you to get connected with the
Yes.
Prep and Villa students. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's going to be a cool one. So
Yeah.
Greg, his line, I'll probably give it to any student that he works with. He'll say, I've seen every movie twice, meaning I failed at it. I thought I was going to fail the next time at it, and I did it again. And after that, it's like, I'm good. I've seen it all. You get comfortable with failure. And for me to him, he's like, look, I want you to learn from the things that I've messed up on.
Yeah.
Because if I can prevent you from making that mistake,
Right.
you can be better off. You don't have to learn it as hard as I did.
And that's the power of mentorship.
Power of mentorship. Yeah, so important.
It's so important. Yeah. So, I kind of reference that we've all been through failures and burnouts and times that we've done something and it hasn't turned out the way we wanted. There are probably people listening to the podcast now as we're talking and they're going through something. Mm-hmm. So, what advice would you have for people going through those seasons of life to get through the burnout times, the doubt, the regret, like those times that you're just low on yourself in your journey? What advice do you have for people on getting through that?
Yeah, I'll tie it back to if you have the purpose-orientated notion and have spent time to think about that, that's the first place I go. Mm. The second place I go is something that reminds you of why you got into it in the first place. Yeah. So an example here, one of my dearest friends, she was a nurse practitioner at UPMC. She created a lot of the nurse mentorship curriculum for the system. Yeah. And she created a company because one of the biggest challenges in healthcare today is provider burnout. Mm. And one of the things that comes up is compassion fatigue. And so like through one of the programs that she wrote up, it helps nurses and nurse practitioners specifically get back to like, what is the purpose of why you started this profession? Yeah. Because when you tie it back to like that reason, that purpose, it's like a deeper thing within your subconscious. Right. And if you can tap into that, that's helpful. And after doing something like that, you just have to find whatever the activity is that helps you get there. So for me, I'm a mountain person, not a water person. My sister, water person. She can be like on a kayak, paddleboard all day. For me, I'm like that in the mountains, hiking, whatever. So when I looked at, I'm going to move from Pittsburgh, like, and from a lifestyle perspective, like how can I get closer to a mountain? Because I know that's where I can find some more peace and solace and sort of recharge. So those are all things that you do, the purpose piece, and then finding something that brings you back to it. That's what I'd recommend.
So when it comes to this, this idea of self-reflection, and you were mentioning, having those activities that can bring you back to that, how important is that for, as being a leader to, now, we're talking about people who, advancing in their careers, making those decisions, making those moves. How important is it for those self-reflection times to be able to grow yourself and really have, you mentioned, as we were talking earlier, just having those points of carving time out in your schedule for intentional deep thinking and reflection and growing yourself?
Yeah. The path to self-awareness is a critical one for success in personal life and definitely in business. Yeah. So when you start managing other people, like you're managing the work, but you're also managing their past experiences and what biases they might be coming and showing up at the table with. How you provide feedback, all of these things you have to become like very aware of. Yeah. So one of the things that I do, I have a monthly CEO group that I meet up with, and there's like the group session, and then there's our sort of like CEO coach, mentor, like he's basically a CEO whisperer type person. Yeah. And one of the things that I've had to work on personally within this self-awareness is, why do I get so upset around compensation discussions? Mm. And part of it is I value servant leadership. It's something that when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, we got into it. I think it falls in line with a lot of what like we hear about and learn about in theology courses at prep, and some of the like leadership type principles that have emerged in the last like several years. So this servant leadership component, I gravitate towards, and my mom, she's a servant leader for sure, gravitate towards sacrificing yourself to like do this thing for the greater good. So when it comes to comp, there's been plenty of times in the epistemics life cycle where I haven't paid myself for months on end.
Yeah.
And I'm still paying people, $100,000+ salaries, and they're like, yeah, everything's great, solid. I'm like, yeah, I'm managing this runway, and there's some challenging dynamics to that. And so when it comes down to like a compensation discussion, there's salary, there's bonuses, there's equity in the company, and I want people to value equity in the company because I think we're building something really huge.
Yeah.
And when somebody else goes into more of like a selfish-oriented conversation, they're looking out for them, their family. It's all coming from a good place, and I have to, rationalize that and be like, oh, like just because this person's asking more on the salary side versus on the equity side versus the bonus side, it's okay. Like that's just their experience where they're coming from. So the self-awareness piece that I've had to work on is like what deeply triggered my anxiety around some of those conversations.
Right.
And that happens all the time. So like I manage those types of conversations differently with different people on the team, knowing where their background's coming from and how they, like where they are on their own self-awareness journey too.
Yeah.
So yeah, very, very important.
And I've found that most of us know when something's not clicking, right? Like you having that moment of knowing there's some type of anxiety, something that's occurring when those conversations come up. And the quicker that we can train ourselves to identify those moments, to then go back and reflect on why did I feel that way, it's going to benefit you sevenfold, because I've had moments and times in my life where I push stuff off for a long time, and I don't want to say the word suffer, but I mean it takes longer to get to a whole place when you go through those moments where you're dealing with something but you're not paying attention to it. So I've trained myself over the years to really start to notice those things quicker. I'm not the best at it by any means, but the quicker you can identify those triggers of something's not right sitting with you, either seeking out a mentor or somebody, a counselor, somebody that you can talk with in a safe spot to evaluate, that is so beneficial.
Yeah. We that was like a theme when you wrote up these questions for me. The theme of sort of identifying it, naming it, and taming it. It was like what we talked through in like our CEO group last week, the week before. So it's so important, and I think recognizing that earlier in life, the better. So whether it's some students who might be listening, or alum, or just other people, like it's a great thing to do. Glad I did it. Shouldn't have waited this long. And the one book that came up a lot within like the CEO group that I'm a part of is called The Untethered Soul, written by this guy Michael Singer, and he's a widely successful author. But prior to that, he built like $100 million plus software companies and went through all of these things on his own. Then I just had to realize, like I just need to let some of this stuff go. Yeah. And the more that you can let go, clearer you can think, and so on. So yeah, it's a good one. Another book.
Yeah, I love all the book. I've been writing these down, as you can see, as we've been talking, because I love reading also, and enjoy reading books like that. So, I just got a couple last questions for you, and then we'll get you out of here. Sure. And appreciate you again coming in and doing this. But kind of big picture kind of question, kind of as we're starting to wrap up. But what legacy do you hope to leave behind as a leader?
I hope really it shows in the work that I choose to do every day with epistemics, Common Good AI, the not-for-profit that I did earlier, and this notion of shining a light on one of the bigger cultural and economic challenges that I think we're going to deal with in our lifetime and our kids' lifetime, which is climate migration and climate refugees. So I think in all of those themes, I hope what my legacy ends up being is that I really tried to do something good for others, strangers I didn't know that our work can impact, and then with those that I work with and my friends and other people that I spend time with is that I help bring the best parts of them out. And if I don't know, I've wrestled. If I do those two things, I would have lived an intentional and good life.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, last question for you. Surprise question, but if you could go back in time, knowing what you know now, and speak at your graduation here at Prep, all right, what would you say to your classmates, again, knowing what you know nowadays?
That's an excellent question. I would bring it back to I can't accept not trying. I think the cool thing that like every person that like will walk through these doors come, a couple weeks when classes start? Next Thursday, yeah. So you walk through the door, you're a freshman, like just give it a shot, right? Like just don't be afraid to fail. Let's go with that one.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to fail. It's going to happen, but each time you go through it, it becomes easier, and you get past it, and you build that confidence that you can go and give it a shot. So that's what I would say. And then I'd probably, if it's next Thursday, whoever the first football game is, I'd probably do a little rally over there. Maybe get the roller coaster back.
Yeah, there we go. Like I was talking about earlier, the rallies definitely have been a major upgrade last year. It was a lot of fun to see that as the students had the boys and girls for the first one together, and yeah, it's pretty exciting. But no, I mean, this has been great. I've been taking notes the whole time we've been talking. I really appreciate everything you shared with us and the work you're doing, with your company and the organizations you've started. It's really remarkable, and, we're glad that, Prep can be a part of your story and the success that you've had. And thank you for coming down and doing the podcast and coming in for the tour.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and now looking at everything else that's here, there's so many more opportunities to, get into this type of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a dance studio now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine a good chunk of the rally crew folks doing the dance studio and stuff, and how fun that would be. The art, suite.
Yes.
Now, yeah, the technology stuff. It's great. So, yeah, thanks for having me on. Glad to be back, and it's amazing to see all the change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again. We appreciate the time.
Mm-hmm.